All right, I'm trying to keep us on time, and I hope everybody enjoyed the break. And now I'm going to introduce Dr. Cherie Dawson Edwards. She's presenting practical applications of restorative justice in organizations. Dr. Cherie Dawson Edwards serves as our Vice Provost for Faculty Affairs at the University of Louisville. She's also an associate professor in the Department of Criminal Justice and directs the social change program in the College of Arts and Sciences. She is a passionate educator who is an exemplar of justice-oriented scholar who focuses on the intersection of public policy and criminal justice with a specific focus on race, schools, and juvenile justice. Throughout her career, she has worked tirelessly for institutional and community change, always striving to bring greater equity and inclusion to the policies and practices of organizations. She has worked with numerous school districts conducting professional development trainings and consulting on racial equity and restorative justice practices. Notably, Dr. Dawson Edwards is an accomplished scholar with a variety of publications for scholarly audiences, policymakers, organizations, and the community. Welcome, Cherie.
Good morning. I have a lot of stuff. I was looking at this podium thinking, how am I going to do this? Because I just have so much stuff. Okay. All right. Thank you for that introduction, Ramey. I'm super excited to be here, and even more excited, I thought I wanted to go first. And I was like, yeah, I like that I saw what everybody else was going to talk about so that I can go third, not last, but third. So just really quickly, I just want to talk a little bit more about my context. Not to be about me, but Vice Provost for Faculty Affairs doesn't mean a lot of people if they're not in academia. So I thought I would just tell you a little bit about my current role. So in my current role, I report directly to the provost. I'm responsible for all faculty human resource things, so hiring, resignations, promotion and tenure, all of that stuff. I'm also responsible for academic leadership and faculty professional development, new faculty orientation. But the last two buckets that I want to kind of talk about will maybe help you understand why I've taken some of the things that I've known for a long time in the criminal justice system and applied those concepts in an organizational setting like the organization I work for here at the University of Louisville. So a third bucket of faculty affairs is to deal with what our wonderful red book, which is our governance document here, calls dispute resolution. So basically that just means conflict, right? Dealing with conflict and grievances and things of that nature. So I know Bridget talked about, somebody who knows where the bodies are. I'm one of those people that knows where the bodies are in this organization, or where people think the bodies are in this organization. So I'll talk to you a little bit about that perception of things as well. And then our fourth bucket that didn't really exist in my office before I got here February of 2022 is the Faculty Inclusive Excellence bucket. And that bucket I brought with me from previous work that I'd done. So my colleague Cherie Wallace is here. She's in the College of Arts and Sciences. I worked in her role previously as the Associate Dean for Diversity, Engagement, Culture, and Climate. So when I moved over to the Provost's office, I didn't leave those things. I left some things, but I didn't leave those principles just in the dean's office. I made sure that they came with me to work in faculty affairs. Since I've been there, talking about making a case for resources and buy-in, I was able to convince not just the provost, but also the board of trustees that I didn't have the resource capacity to do the fourth bucket that needed so desperately to be done at our university. And so I recently hired an inaugural director of Faculty Inclusive Excellence. Her name is Whitney Sweetie Martin. She starts on July 5th. I'm super duper excited to have someone that will work with Lee Gill's office, will work with my colleagues that are associate and assistant deans, DEI, and also work with my colleagues that are in faculty affairs at the different colleges to just make sure we get this thing done and get it done right and make sure it sustains here at the university. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about my office and how this stuff works for me now. So in my bio, she said that I was a criminal justice professor, and I am, and I have been for decades. Like, I think I'm on like year 22 or something. Thank you, you know. So I think I'm on like year 22 or 3, I don't know, it's been a long time. But I also direct our social change program in the College of Arts and Sciences, and oftentimes when people think about criminal justice, they don't think of someone from a social justice perspective. And I have been for a long time the anomaly in any department that I've taught at, not just here at the University of Louisville. But I'll tell you that the work that I'm about to talk to you about, it generated from criminal justice, right? I was studying racial disparities in the juvenile justice system, and at the time, you know, the funded federal grant research required you to address the issue disproportionate minority contact. And it's about how minority children have contact with the different steps in the criminal justice system and how they're overrepresented, which they still are, by the way, overrepresented in the justice system. And so as I started doing that work, I had a grant. And I was looking in Kentucky at 4 different counties about their disproportionality. And I was noticing, which isn't something I noticed only, but I saw it in the data that a lot of the referrals to court were coming from schools. And I was like, hold up. Like, that's not cool. Like, we've got to do something about that, so let's back it up. And so I started working with our local schools here in Jefferson County to think about how restorative practices could supplement or replace some of the disciplinary responses in the school system. And then as I began to do that work, I realized that it's not just about the teachers or the principals against, you know, with the students, but it's also about how the folks the adults in the building act in front of the students, right? So are you being restorative with your colleagues? Are you using that kind of language amongst your people in your office staff? When the parents come in, how are they being greeted? What is the language being used? And I realized, you know, that we have this concept of restorative justice in the justice system. We have this concept of restorative practices in like the educational system. But to me, restorative practices means that you're talking about the whole culture and climate, not just when there is a conflict, right? So you're talking about avoiding conflict. You're talking about communication. You're talking about all these different things that are not just about a response to a conflict. And so when you think about your organization, whether it's a university, whether it's a business, whether it's a nonprofit, you know, whatever, a governmental organization, what is the culture and climate in your organization, and how can restorative practices principles be applied there? So that's kind of what I want to talk to you all about today. So I don't know if you've ever been to a restorative justice training, but we like to use quotes. And part of what we call the circle process is this is not a how to do restorative justice kind of training, but part of a circle process is to open up the container with a quote. And so I saw this quote in this book, which I'm going to move all my stuff, but I just want to reference this book because it is brilliant. I just recently read it. It's called Colorizing Restorative Justice. And so if anybody is interested in how DEI work and restorative justice collide, then this book, it came out in 2020, is one of the better resources I've seen. Get that out of the way so I can have some room up here. So in this book I was reading, they start out the opening with this quote by Alice Walker. Everybody's familiar with Alice Walker, social activist, poet, Pulitzer Prize, The Color Purple, okay. And she said, healing begins where the wound was made. And I feel like that's a very powerful quote, right? Healing begins where the wound was made. And so I put the whole quote up here, even though that is the one that people often talk about when we talk about restorative justice, because I wanted you to have access to it. I knew that Ramey was going to share these slides, so I put more on the slides than I'm going to necessarily talk about, so that you can, if you feel like you want to dive in deeper, then you can feel comfortable doing that. And so healing begins where the wound was made. I have to stop here and let you know that restorative justice is not something that we created right here in this country necessarily, and that it can be attributed to indigenous persons. I first was introduced to this concept through the work in New Zealand, where they basically did an overhaul of their whole juvenile justice system. I'm going to pronounce this wrong, but it's Maori, I think. Yes, I think I got it. Maori? Oh, see, I've said it that way, and then people have told me differently. They said that you pronounce it M-A-H-A-W-R-E-E. Okay. Okay, well, I said that the other day on a podcast, and I was like, did I say it right? So I've been saying Maori, but so thank you for correcting me, and we should all correct the internet too. So when you do pronunciation, so thank you. So the Maori folks in New Zealand were, as far as their youth, I don't know about their whole culture, but their youth were disproportionately impacted by the juvenile justice system. So they adopted their principles to their justice system. And, you lived there before, so you probably know that it hasn't been overwhelmingly as successful as we thought. But that's where we got the concept of restorative justice and applied it to our country and our justice system is through the work of, the folks in New Zealand. So I want to acknowledge that because I feel like part of the conversation today is to talk a little bit about how restorative justice has been co-opted. And you can't have a conversation about DEI without talking about how things that are meant well also can be co-opted and maintain the same principles that have afflicted us in other ways. And so one of the things that I do want to say before I change this slide is that I think it's the second sentence or the third sentence. It says the process of the storytelling itself is a healing process. So I want to thank Emma for sharing her stories. And I'm glad that I came third because she told her story, right? And telling your story means that you're being authentic and you're being vulnerable, and that is a space where you create the opportunity for moving forward and healing. So I'm not going to talk in specifics about exactly what restorative justice is. There is a one-pager that accompanies the scenarios in your folder that talks more about what is restorative justice, what are those principles, and what are the assumptions and things like that. But I did want to highlight these three things related to restorative justice, and this is also in the one-pager. We need to focus on the need that is created when relationships are harmed. We need to focus on the obligations that we have when harm has been done. And then we need to focus on the healing and the amends. And amends in restorative justice is how do you make it right? How do you put things back right? I've been in many conversations over the last, 15 years talking about restorative justice where people get involved in the semantics. Well, restore people to what? And so, you can't ever give somebody you can never put someone exactly where they were before a harm was done. But you can attempt to restore their sense of self. And so when you think about what you're restoring, yes, you can restore by buying someone a new car if you wrecked it. But you can't restore that they are now scared to drive or whatever. But you can try to get them back to their sense of self. So this is not on my slide deck, but I do feel like as the justice, I think we changed it. We're not virtue experts anymore. We're affiliate faculty. Is that what we are? Okay, I'm the justice virtue affiliate faculty. So I felt like before I talked about the scenarios and thinking about restorative justice in organizations, that we should talk about workplace and organizational injustice, right? So how many of you all have ever felt like there has been some injustice, whether you've seen it or experienced it in your organization or workplace? Everybody should have felt that. You've had to have seen it or you've had to experience or both. So I want to talk to us about a couple of types of injustice and then also about workplace justice. So one of the types of injustice that I often have to explain to people, or I serve as kind of the intermediary between faculty who have concerns and then like department chairs and deans who are their supervisors and trying to explain things in between. So perceived injustice, what do you think that is? And I'm also a faculty member, so it's really hard for me to stand at a podium. I am like a walker talker kind of person. So that's why I'm like swaying, like what am I supposed to do with my body? So what do you think perceived injustice is? Anybody? I know enough people in this audience, and I wear glasses now so I can now see your face. So what do you think perceived injustice is? I don't even hear you, I'm sorry. Okay, so it's something that feels like an injustice, but it wasn't necessarily intended to be. Anybody else? Perceived injustice. You said a point of view of the victim? Okay. Anybody else? So you believed it to be an injustice. Okay. So perceived injustice is also about the reaction, right? And so I have this perception that harm or wrong was done to me, and how I react is part of the perceived injustice. Another form of injustice that can be seen in the workplace or in organizations is anticipatory injustice. What do you think that is? Yeah. You just expect it, right? I see that a lot with faculty. Oh, well, we just expect that that's not going to happen, or that we just expect that we're going to be treated. I'm like, but that's not even what's happening. But we think that's probably what's going to happen. It doesn't matter. I can say, no, that's really not the conversation that's happening. And it's because of what? You bring things with you. You bring things forward with you. So I know with our previous now outgoing provost, Lori Gonzalez, we did some work on organizational trust at the university. And one of the facilitators was like, inherited distrust. And I was like, ooh, I've inherited distrust, just by nature of the role, not because it's Cherie, but because of the work that I do. I inherit some distrust. So there's perceived injustice, there's anticipatory injustice, there's actual real injustice that occurs. But then let's talk about what that's the injustice side. But what does justice look like in an organization? So one type of justice in an organization is distributive justice. And distributive justice is about the fairness of the outcome of a decision that was made about an individual organizational member. So the fairness in outcome of the outcome. Was the outcome fair? Was the decision fair? Procedural justice is about the fairness of the process. Was the process by which you came to this decision about me, does that feel like it was fair? And then you have interactional justice. And some would argue that interactional justice is the key to this restorative piece, right? And the interactional justice is the fairness of the interpersonal treatment. What do you think that means? The fairness of the interpersonal treatment an individual receives from a decision maker. How is it communicated? How many times is it not about what someone said, but how they said it, right? And I can tell you that the majority of the faculty concerns I see in this organization is about how people talk to each other. And you probably have noticed that in your organizations too. If you just knew how to talk to people, because I don't care. I'm still sure. I'm like, who are you talking to? I may not always say it out loud, but my face will be like, when you kind of step back and be like, what? Were you talking to me? No, you weren't talking to me. So at any rate, interactional justice is about that interpersonal piece. And sometimes even if you say the tough thing and you're having to do the tough thing, the way that you come at someone, the way that you care about their humanity and their dignity makes a big difference in how they react to that, right? So I wanted to talk about justice in the workplace or in organizations before we start talking more about what restorative justice looks like. So in the criminal justice system, we talk about restorative justice as I'm making noise. Oh, okay, sorry. We talk about restorative justice in contrast to what we call retributive justice. And retributive justice is about retribution, which means what? Vengeance, revenge, eye for an eye. You did this, you should get this, right? What'd you say? Yes, settling the score, right? And so we compare and contrast those things when we talk about in the justice system. In the workplace, we compare legalistic justice versus restorative justice. And basically, the legalistic just replaces retributive justice. So in a workplace environment, we do have HR. I did say faculty HR falls underneath me. I get it. There's laws, there's policy and process. But sometimes we're hampered by that. Oh, no. You have to follow this policy if you want to, do progressive discipline for a faculty member. I'm like, well, why can't a supervisor just say, hey, let's chat? It's like, we can't stop people from saying, hey, you know what, your behavior in the faculty meeting was disruptive. I don't appreciate how you made your colleagues feel. I need you to stop doing that. But from a legalistic perspective, it has to be, I documented it, and I had to da-da-da, and blah, 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 blah. But Sometimes it just takes people to be called in. Who said that? Emma. Called in or called out about things for them to change their behavior. Because I will tell you, I mean, I've evolved a lot in my life, but I was one of those people that would just tell people how I felt because I thought that they needed to know how, and that was not always my role, to do that. But I didn't even have any awareness of it. And I used to, when I would say things and people would be like, they'd recoil, I'm like, well, that's their problem. No, Cherie, it's your problem too, because communication goes both ways. If you are saying something that people are, then do you even know what you sound like? Most of the time I didn't. And so that's part of, thinking about things versus a legalistic thing versus a restorative. So let's talk really quickly about this. So when we think about wrongdoing, then in a legalistic perspective in an organization, we're talking about a violation of policy, right? You did something wrong, you violated the rule or the policy. Of course, in criminal justice, it's you violated the law, right? And so legalistic is focused on the rule that has been violated, where restorative is focused on the violation of people and relationships and the workplace norms and values. Managing wrongdoing in a legalistic perspective is about using evidence and that the authority manages the wrongdoing. HR, or faculty affairs, or the provost, or whoever, they manage your department chair, they have to manage it. Well, in a restorative process, you have dialogue, you communicate. You have a meeting where people are not feeling like it's a disciplinary hearing. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I just want to talk to somebody and they're like, well, can I have a lawyer? I'm like, no, you're not even in trouble. I just want to know what happened, and people are so used to being accused of something. Why did you do this? I'm sorry. You're just right here in my line of sight. You're like, I didn't do anything. When people are like, why did you do this? Or what, I just want to know what happened. You tell me what happened, and oftentimes that'll be enough for me to say, you know what? This is just lack of communication. This is miscommunication. This is da-da-da-da. It's not even anything that big, but if we can't talk to people about what happened, and it has to be so legalistic and rigid, we'll continue with a culture and climate in our organizations where people don't feel safe, they don't feel like they can trust, and they don't feel like they belong. So in a legalistic perspective, the desired outcome for justice is the reinforcement of policy. From a restorative perspective, it's forgiveness, reconciliation, reintegration, right? And those are soft, lovey words. We don't get soft and lovey at work, right? Well, they're not really that soft and lovey, but if we're always so used to just this rigidness, then it may be hard to forgive. I'll just give you, I'm a storyteller too, like Emma. I was a department chair several years ago, and I remember being at a department meeting, a faculty meeting, and I told two of my colleagues, who used to be my professors when I was a grad student many years ago, that their beef was older than my youngest colleague who's an assistant professor and a PhD. Your beef is older than a 28 or 30-year-old. Why? Why have you gone through this many decades working with each other and you're still mad about something that happened before he was born, And so that's not lovey, that's just get over it. Let's move on. Let's move and grow through it, And so I don't look at forgiveness and reconciliation and reintegration as tree-hugging granola, which a lot of people, when they hear restorative justice, they assume nothing's wrong with tree-hugging and granola. I'm just saying, in an organizational environment, people don't necessarily think that those things are fitting, and I'm here to argue that they are. Underlying values in legalistic, it's about rationality and authority and perceived objectivity, because we all know a lot of things are not objective, even though people say that they are. And in a restorative environment, it's about holistic concern. Holistic means the whole person, the whole situation, interdependence, healing, and growth. So, really quickly, because this is, I think, also in your handout, a restorative workplace practices involves accountability. You have to acknowledge that you cause harm, understand where others are and how they're affected by your actions, take steps to repair the harm, give back to the community, and make a plan so that it doesn't happen again. And then I threw this slide in here about accountability. I could do a whole workshop on accountability in the workplace, but I won't. So I just thought this little slide about the Wizard of Oz would help support the fact that accountability is a huge part of restorative practices in the workplace. So this is, I'm not going to go through everything on this slide, but in a restorative workplace practice, you want to bring all the parties together. So really quickly, I want to make sure that I dispel the victim-offender binary that people often think is involved in a conflict. In restorative justice practices, we talk about parties to the conflict or parties to the issue. Because if you really think about it, sometimes I'm not just the victim, I'm also part of the conflict, right? And it's easy to say, oh, well, you treated me this way, but you don't step back and say, what happened before that? You know, did I do anything that contributed to it as well? And that's not victim blaming, but it's saying that as adults in a workplace, sometimes we're parties to a conflict, not just the binary of victim and offender. And then even if there was a binary, it would be the wrongdoer and the person harmed. And so we just don't use that criminal justice language in restorative justice. Language matters, semantics, it may be semantics, but language actually does matter in restorative justice. And so create a safe space, make things right. Ooh, I like this one. Address not only the facts, but perceptions, feelings, and emotions. Not only the facts, but perceptions, feelings, and emotions. Because if you're gonna move forward, you can't just focus on, this was the exact fact. This is the facts as I know it. Yeah, but you know what? I didn't feel it that way. I didn't see it that way. It felt very different for me than it did for you. And so let's talk about the perceptions, emotions, and feelings, and have that intellectual empathy to put yourself in one's shoes as them and their stuff, not what I would do if I blah, blah, blah. How would it feel to be Ryan in his shoes with his context? And can I better understand the conflict from that perspective? So there are many ways to conduct restorative justice in the workplace. You can do circles, you can do talking circles, you can do harm reduction circles, you can do conflict circles, you can do some reintegration type circles. But regardless of which process you work on, there is a process of designing the questions that will facilitate the conversation. And so Kay Pranis is a notable peacemaking circle practitioner who says that effective questions are framed to encourage participation, for people to speak for their own lived experiences, invite participants to share stories. So storytelling is super important. Focus on feelings and impacts rather than facts. Invite recognition of strengths or assets as well as the difficulties, and then transition participants from the discussion of difficult or painful events into discussions on what can be done to make things better. What can be done to make things better? So I'm going to stop here for a second. I don't have a whole lot of time, but I want to ask you about apologies. How do you all apologize? I'll give you an example. My husband, my bad. Why'd you do that? My bad. That's not an apology, but anyway, go ahead.
I think apologies come with a lot of people. I won't say myself, but a lot of people, it depends on who it is. Mm-hmm. So the feelings, how you feel about that person. So sometimes we can't set aside our personal feelings to get on with the business. You know, so we apologize, you know, I'm sorry, but go back to doing the same thing again, or do it in another way. Mm-hmm. You know, you're nasty in another way, but you're still nasty. So
you're nasty.
You know what I mean? You're still nasty. You're not nice. You didn't mean it. You did it to get through the process. But, you know, we still haven't come to a resolution. So I think it depends. I've done that. I'm going to just admit it.
Thank you for your vulnerability. I see another hand back there, and then Kristen, I'll come to you.
Apologies are very important to me in how I apologize. So not only, it's recognizing how my behavior or how my perceived judgments have affected you, and also how I intend to atone for my behavior.
Atone, intend to atone. I like that. Go ahead, Kristen.
Something that my husband does is he'll say, I'm sorry if I. And then you did. That's not what I thought.
Yeah. Sorry that yeah. So those are excellent. Thank you all for that. I particularly appreciate the atonement piece, right? Because I always tell not just my partner, but my children, that apologies are not just I'm sorry, right? It's I'm sorry, but then it's an acknowledgement of what you did, because I want to hear you say and know that you did this thing. And then the third piece is how are you going to how are you going to make sure that doesn't happen again? So that goes back to the action piece. So apologies are actually actions, right? So when we ask for amends in restorative justice practices, we're asking for an action, right? That you just can't say you're sorry. The action could be that it's a public apology. Yeah, I want you to apologize in front of everybody that witnessed, the whole community that witnessed you treat me this way. You know, I might be good with that, and then I'm done. I'm actually pretty good with being done with things. I say my piece, we get it, and it might be the 15 years of restorative justice work, but it really does work, and it really does help you even as your intrapersonal self, to be able to think about, you know, what's happened here and how can I do things differently. So 3 central questions when harm occurs in the workplace. A good place to start is with these questions. Who has been hurt? What are their needs? And who has the obligations to address the needs or to put right the harms? And so if you're, if you're a leader in your organization, or even if you're not, if something has happened, who has been hurt? What are their needs, and who has the obligation to address the needs to put right the harm or the wrong? And oftentimes it's not you. You know, you may be facilitating this restorative process. You may find, oh wait, that was me. Maybe if as the leader I'd stepped up in the meeting, things wouldn't have exacerbated, and maybe I owe someone an action in response to that. And so these things are really helpful in understanding ourselves as well. So another quote, because that's what we do in restorative justice, Kay Pranis, again with Peacemaking Circle, says, "Respect means honoring ourselves by acting in accord with our values, honoring others by recognizing their right to be different, and treating others with dignity. We express respect not only in how we speak and act, but also through our emotions and body language." Ooh. Respect comes from a deep inner place of acknowledging worth inherent in every aspect of creation. So how many of you all have body language that can sometimes be picked up from people? Yeah. So that's part of the introspective piece of restorative justice, realizing again what you're putting out there. You know, I'm one of those people that says, I will match your energy. I come with peace. I don't know if you know Erykah Badu, but she has like this quote that she's like, I come with peace and incense, but I will go Colt 45 on you if I have to. And I'm like, ooh, that sounds like restorative justice. So at any rate, what you have in your packet are some scenarios that I won't say whose life experiences they are, but I will say that I worked with Rami and Ryan on this tool quite a bit, and I have future ideas of what to do with it. More recently, I've been involved with projects on campus, the Athena project, and they brought in some interactive theater type things, and I can see that some of these scenarios could turn into something like that, where people actually live and work through them with people that are acting in the roles. But my idea for this time that we have left is to look at these scenarios, and they do bring in the DEI, and I put A. I mean, more recently in some of the organizations that I'm involved in, not just at University of Louisville, but the A is for accessibility and access. Oftentimes when we talk about DEI, especially to me in Kentucky, people think you're only talking about race and gender, and they assume that you're not talking about accessibility issues or other things like that. And so I put the A on there now. I used to put the B for belonging. You know, we all changed it. We all talking about the same thing here. But I have to call out things so people won't be like, well, you forgot about this group. I'm like, no, I didn't. You know, so that's why the A is on there, just so you all, access and accessibility. So I do want to talk about the, convergence of DEIA work and restorative practices, and I hope that you see this in the scenarios. But I want to bring forward something that Audre Lorde said in 1984, and I won't read the whole thing, but just know that when you look at the scenarios, I want you to recognize that people who are expected to educate and do these things, it's not anything new. It's 2023, and Audre Lorde called it out in 1984. And so we're not talking about new things here. If you've never heard of it, it's not because it's not been there. It's just something that in your circles, maybe that it wasn't talked about. And then I do have, I told you about this book that I've been reading, and this is not in the slide deck, but I do want to pull an excerpt out from this book about DEIA and restorative workplace practices. And so Valandra et al. In this book says that a characteristic of a fully inclusive restorative work environment means that there's the collective buy-in of many groups, that there is collaboration, which yields richer and more effective and stronger outcomes. Outcomes last longer because more people and groups are vested in making them work and respond when problems arise. And problem solving draws on a wider pool of knowledge, experience, creativity, and networks. So how much time do I have, Remy?
About 8 minutes.
Okay, so we're only going to do one. So I put 2 in here. If you look at your handout, scenario 1 for me is actually scenario number 3 in the restorative scenario. So I'm going to do a Bridget Burpo and say that you have like 4 minutes. No, you have 5 minutes to read over this. Actually, I can read the scenario, I think, with these glasses. I can read the scenario, and then I'd like for you to discuss. I have some questions on the next slide. It says, you are a Black woman serving as a voluntary representative on the board of the local school district. You are the chief diversity officer in the organization where you are employed. The chairperson of the school board publicly stated that the board hopes that you will share your expertise as a diversity officer when attending board meetings. You are reluctant to do this because diversity, equity, and inclusion work is exhausting, vulnerable work, and you need boundaries. It is daunting to think of making yourself vulnerable and exhausted for the volunteer work in addition to doing so for your daily job. Even so, you agree to attend meetings and offer relevant insight. Demographic shifts over the past 10 years have put the board in a position in which redistricting is unavoidable. This is a contentious issue because it affects home prices, student access to educational opportunities, busing routes, funding priorities, and the integration of neighborhoods with high proportions of people from individual races and socioeconomic statuses. The chair asked people to brainstorm ideas. Key, brainstorm. You are one of many people participating in this conversation. The facilitator captures everyone's ideas on a flip chart without comment. Your ideas have been among the more creative, even risky ones. Then, after sharing one idea that included some diversity, equity, inclusion content, a white woman suggests that she does not like the tone of your suggestions and asks whether your idea is even legal. The idea was not illegal, and no other idea shared so far has received any criticism. After she speaks, there is an uncomfortable silence, and the conversation moves on. When the meeting is over, the woman approaches you and says she would like to work through the issue with you. She says nothing about how she questioned the tone and legality of your comment in a session in which everyone was told to brainstorm. That brainstorming does not involve criticism or wrong answers. She just tries to explain her point of view. So the question is there harm? What is the harm? What could you do to hold the person who caused the harm accountable for what they said? How do we consider all the voices in the conflict? And what needs to be done to appropriately balance accountability and inclusion? So I know with the 4 minutes that you have left, that's not much time, but if you can at least get to the first 2 questions and think about, is there harm? And what is it? And what could be done to hold the person accountable? Then that would be awesome. And your groups, your small groups. All right, I have a loud voice. I don't know if I need you to clap or anything, but I'm really loud. So I'm running out of time, and I appreciate the enthusiasm. I'm hoping it's about the conversation I asked you to have. So what I will say, I would like at least one group, maybe. I have 3 minutes to talk to me about what you all talked about. Is there harm? Did anybody see harm in this scenario? Oh, I see some. Good. I felt harm in this. Okay, it wasn't me. Maybe. Who do you think? What was the harm? Go ahead.
By questioning the legality of the solution that she proposed
Thank you. Oh, I see one here, and then I'll come to you. Go ahead.
I think our group, we came to the conclusion that the harm came from the tone policing. It was unnecessary and should have been dealt with, privately if somebody had a question. Because questioning something, whether or not it's illegal, is not harmful. It's how you say it that's harmful.
Go ahead.
It really shut down the conversation too. So now somebody attacked me, but Larry's watching too, so Larry's not gonna put out his information anymore. Now creating that good, safe dynamic.
Awesome. Thank you. Go ahead.
I would say part of the harm, I think, is that no one spoke up, so that is harmful as well, that, I wasn't acknowledged as important enough for somebody to stand up.
Yep. Thank you. Go ahead.
In that same vein, the harm was, who was leading this meeting? Who's moderating and should have, reminded everybody of all the things they agreed to be a part of this group and the discussion.
Awesome. Thank you all. Go ahead, Kristen.
It undermines DEI altogether, not just that woman, because she was asked to contribute through that lens, and when nobody spoke up at all, it's not just her, it's the concept.
Sure. So what do you think should be done? Y'all didn't get that far because I only asked you to do the first two. Oh, you like, yes, we did. Okay. Oh, yes, we did. Okay, I got 1 minute. What y'all say?
So she said, can we talk after this? Okay, it could go real left, just those two. So we discussed an ally, a leader, a member of the board. Somebody get involved because it's already conflict. So.
Awesome. So I will say that there is part 2 to this scenario. It did not end there. And so I would encourage you all, in your free time, I know you're so free like I am, but there is a part 2 to this. And I will tell you that this is a scenario, not the exact scenario, but it is a scenario that I was involved in, and a restorative process was used and it was effective. And so just, to put that out there, that it is something that can be used. So I am out of time. I'm gonna have to go back to my reality. That's why my little Bitmoji's there. Like, I really enjoy doing stuff like this. I do not get enough of an opportunity to do these things anymore. But thank you all so much for your enthusiastic participation. Thank you.
Thank you, Cherie. I think, Ryan, you have to get prepped by Ron, correct? Okay. So while Ron is doing that, I just want to acknowledge some people in this room who are part of our center. So if you are a professional affiliate or I'm getting used to the new term. Affiliated professional or affiliated faculty, please stand up. Many of these people contribute to our work, to our leadership tools, to our events. So I just want to give them a round of applause. Thank you. And I believe I see a board member or two. So if you are an advisory board member of the Center for Positive Leadership, please stand up. It may just be Jenna. Yay. Thanks, Jenna, for being here. Yeah. Okay, and there's 2 other people I want to acknowledge. One of them I think has already escaped, and the other one's going to kill me for asking her to stand up. But Kelly Watson, will you stand up? She's our event planner for the College of Business. I literally could not do this event without her. And there was another person sitting next to her named Manuela Perry. She's our business director for executive education. She completely helped me with this event as well. Sorry, I keep getting close to the microphone. But thank you to the 2 of you. Okay. I am going to introduce Ryan. He is going to talk about his Inclusive Experiences workbook. It is in your folder. And Dr. Quinn is not only my counterpart in the Center for Positive Leadership, he's our academic director. He's also Assistant Dean of Innovation and Strategy at the University of Louisville, but that is not actually 2 more days. He only has 2 more days in that role, so he can devote more time to the center. And he's Department Chair for Management and Entrepreneurship. He has been heavily involved in the Positive Organizational Scholarship movement focusing many of his research questions on understanding what makes organizations and the people with them flourish, excel, and exceed expectations. Ryan has published articles in journals such as Administrative Science Quarterly, Academy of Management Review, Organization Science, Human Resource Management, Academy of Management Annals, and Journal of Management. He co-authored 2 editions of the book Lift and The Fundamental State of Leadership with his father, Robert E. Quinn. Welcome, Ryan. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This has been such a great event, such great people, and such great presenters. I just want to once again, if you will join me again in thanking Lee and Bridget and Emma and Cherie for all they contributed. It feels so grateful for them. I also, in addition, you'll notice that for each presentation there was a tool that accompanied that, and the idea of having these tools is so that you have practical, hands-on things that you can work with, that you can share with your colleagues at work, that you can use again and again. As Ramey mentioned earlier, we have our new website coming out. We were really hoping that our new website would be done in time for this event, but unfortunately, as projects often do, it exceeded. So we have about 4 weeks until it's out. So you'll notice on many of the tools, the new website is there, positiveleadership.louisville.edu. And so put it in your calendars on your phone in 4 weeks to check and come in and see it. And you'll see, you can actually download the tools, so you won't have just physical copies, but you can print them out and use them at your discretion as well. In pointing out about the tools, the idea was to make it both practical and iterable, like that you can use them again and again because they're tools. And so in addition to the tools that were presented today, there are other tools. We actually have many tools at the Center for Positive Leadership that we use to help people practice positive leadership. And the idea with these tool workshops and presenting them is that they're to help people lead with virtues. So today we're learning how to lead with inclusivity and lead with justice. But other events we have, which I'll talk about later, will help us introduce tools on leading with compassion, or leading with courage, or leading with resilience, or many of the other things that are useful to people as well. And we're also starting to do, beginning with this one, it used to be we just did these tools around, hey, let's do leading with playfulness this time. And those were great, but now we're actually applying them to specific issues. So around the issue of diversity, equity, inclusion, how do we do this? And as you see on your little trifold centerpiece there, that in one of our upcoming events, we're going to be talking about burnout, which is a huge issue in a lot of organizations right now. And so it'll be, how do you lead with playfulness to overcome burnout? How do you lead with compassion to overcome burnout? And so on. So all of these tools are in there, and in addition to the tools on inclusivity and justice that you see here today, you'll notice that there are other tools that we are not talking about, which are also available in this folder and soon to be available on our website, that are in there. So for example, the one that you see on the left there was created by one of our Rector Fellows, who are the researchers and developers that we offer grants for every year. And so she is Ronique Kark from Israel, and she developed a workshop and includes all the slides and instructor manual for helping men become better allies to women. And so that's one of the tools that's available in our website. You'll also notice that there's some tools that are stories. So Cherie just presented to us scenarios that you can talk through. My battery is running low. So Cherie has presented scenarios to us, and each scenario stops and doesn't tell you what the resolution was, and you have to figure out what it is you're going to do. In addition to this, you'll see other ones that are stories in here, and it does include the whole stories. And some of them were examples of things that were handled well, and other ones were things that were not handled so well. But the same thing can be done in your workplace. At the beginning of a meeting, you can sit down and say, all right, we're not going to talk about all of these. That would take our whole meeting. But let's take one and talk it through. In her book, Mary Gentile wrote a book called Giving Voice to Values. And one of the bits of research that she mentions in there is, when people actually stand up and give voice to their values, I don't think we should do this, or I think this is a great idea and we should do this, or whatever it is, or I think we need to question what's going on here, or can we highlight that a little bit more? a lot of people struggle with expressing their voice and speaking up in organizations, and a lot of research has tried to figure out what makes a difference on that. And one of the things that has been found is that when people grew up and they discussed possible scenarios with respected adults, they were more likely in their own adulthood to actually speak up and give voice to values. Well, that's great for those who are kids and still have that opportunity. Parents, take that in mind. But that also can work for us if we start talking through these scenarios ourselves, because one of the reasons why people speak up and do these kinds of things is because prior to talking about it, they didn't think it through and they don't know what they could do. And once you've actually thought it through, then when those situations come up, you're more likely to know what's an appropriate way for me to handle this. So if we want to do this in our workplace, then using the scenarios, using the stories, talking about them, what would you do? What would you do differently? What would you do the same? Helps us to be more prepared and more courageous to stand up and do those things when it comes. And then finally, there's also research in there that have been done by other Rector Fellows on handling these kinds of situations. So before I dive into my own tool that I'm going to be presenting today, I just wanted to let you know what the other tools are in there. They're available for use both here and then soon to be available online through our website. And I just wanted to make sure we acknowledge that. So we're going to be diving through the tool that has the balloons on it today. It's the Inclusive Experiences Workbook. If you want to pull it out, I'm going to give you a hopefully brief introduction before we dive in, and then from there, when we dive in, I'm actually going to have us work on it together and try it out. So with that in mind, let me tell you what I learned last summer. Last summer, I'm an avid book listener. I have my Audible account, and I'm always getting new books, and many of you are familiar with the 1619 Project book that addresses a lot of racial inequity issues in the United States. And it's been a controversial book in the United States as well for various reasons. And I thought, rather than develop an opinion about a controversy without reading the book, maybe I should actually read the book and develop my own opinions about it. I personally thought the book was well done. There may be points that I might quibble with, but overall, I thought it was pretty well done. But there was a pattern in the book that stood out to me as I read it that was very striking. And the pattern was that as it reviewed the history of the United States, starting in 1619, that what would happen is, the status quo was not desirable. We were in a state of slavery and exploitation and so forth. But disruptions would happen. Something would be done to try to, with that disruption, it opened up the possibility of taking some action. Usually the action was some form of law or policy. And then, for the next however many years, people would work to undermine that law or policy until people started to wonder, how much progress did we really make? So there would be an amendment that would be created to the Constitution, and let's say the voting rights for African Americans in society, and then people in certain states would make laws that would say, well, actually, you have to have a grandfather that was educated in order to vote, or you have to, and then it would completely undermine the point of giving voting rights to people. And this just happened over, it was like a real pattern in the book, and I was like, a little bit depressing to see how that process would unfold. Why do I mention this in regards to an Inclusive Experiences Workbook? Well, I think a lot of this has to do with culture, and I want to talk about how this works. So some kind of policy or law or whatever happens, those who have power and that power has been threatened get angry, and they undermine and work around that, and then that either leads to more policy to try to fix it, or other policies that help to undermine it or whatever else, and it seems to go on in this cycle. There is a quote in the business literature, it's sometimes been attributed to Peter Drucker, but I don't think that they've ever actually firmly said this is where it comes from, but they say culture eats strategy for breakfast, and it's been applied to other things as well. Culture eats policy for breakfast, culture eats technology for breakfast. It just tends to, if we don't address the culture, if we use other kind of interventions to deal with things when culture is the problem, then culture tends to undermine what we're doing, or people work around it, or other problems come up. And so as a result, I think we need to examine this pattern in our society from a cultural perspective. So really quickly, culture are the shared beliefs that drive our actions and our experiences, and it's implicit, assumed, we're unaware of it, and it gets reinforced by those actions and various beliefs in society. And so here I specifically depict it in this way as a circular idea. This model is similar to the one in the Change the Culture, Change the Game book, which I do recommend. I think it's a great, well-done book on culture change. But they tend to treat it kind of as a pyramid, and I took it out of the pyramid model and put it into this circle here because I wanted to convey that reinforcing idea. So when they talk about changing culture, then the idea is start with the results you want. And how are they different from the results you're getting right now? W. Edwards Deming from the quality movement back in the 80s and the 90s was famous for saying, every organization is perfectly designed to be getting the results it's getting right now. If that makes you depressed about your own organization, that's fair, but it also is a way out of it, right? There's different ways to think about and design things. Start with the results you want and the results you have now, and ask, what actions are leading to those results? What actions will we have to have if we want to get to the new results? That's a very logical, useful question. The problem is most managers stop there. Once you actually get that, you're like, oh, I want these results and I need these actions. What do you think most managers do? Wild guess. How do they try to implement the actions? Force. We make a policy. We tell people they have to do it or else they're going to get fired if they don't do it. And we try to make people behave that way. However, if I am compelled against my will, I'm of the same opinion still. And so the minute you're not forcing me, observing me, watching me, trying to get me to do it, or having some policy around me, what am I going to do? Get out of it, undermine it, not follow anymore, whatever it is. And so there becomes the big problem as we keep trying to solve things by making people do things. That doesn't mean that policy isn't important, that laws aren't important. It is, but we might want to think a little further first. If these are the actions we want, but these are the actions we're getting right now, why? What beliefs are driving the actions we're getting right now? What beliefs are would drive the actions we want to get? And where do beliefs come from? And here, beliefs is a little bit misleading because we tend to think about beliefs as a statement that I can formally say. These are the beliefs that are the unconscious, unquestioned, reactive, kind of think of them as a script. In my mind, when X happens, I do Y kind of beliefs. And once I can actually name those and put words on them, I can actually do something about them. And we learn these unconscious beliefs through socialization or the experiences we have. And that's where the real point of intervention for leaders is not in controlling the actions, but in changing the experiences that our people are having, experiences that teach them to believe something different than what they believe right now. So that's what we're looking for, is how do we change the experiences that our people are having in a way that will actually change their beliefs. That moves us from policy that controls to policy that educates, but it also means we need to pay attention to other experiences that people have in addition to policy. What other experiences might be causing what we have now? How might we change those experiences to get different beliefs? So I put this all together as a setup. On one hand, this model is really useful if you're the leader of the organization and you can go out and run the process and do it yourself. But what if I'm not the leader? And what if I'm just a person who's, wants to make a difference, but I can't control whether my boss does this or not, or whether my CEO does this or not, or whatever else? Has anyone here ever heard of John Woolman? Most people haven't when I ask that question. John Woolman was a Quaker who lived in the 1700s in the US colonies, and early in his experience, he had a dilemma that was presented to him. On one hand, most Quakers at that time were slave owners. On the other hand, John had had some experiences early in his childhood that made him an enemy to slavery. He wanted to continue to be a part of his religious community, and he believed the beliefs of his religious community, but it didn't fit with what he saw in the practice of slavery, and he had to figure out what to do about that. He could have ignored it. He could have raged against the machine. Instead, he took a very different approach. He spent his adult life walking the length and breadth of the U.S. colonies, visiting a house here, visiting a congregation there, visiting a farming community there, and asking them simple, profound, non-judgmental questions. What does it mean to you as a person to own a human being? What effect might it have on your children to will a human being over to them? And then he'd stop and listen and talk. And then he'd go to the next farmhouse or the next congregation or whatever it is. The net effect of, now notice, John Woolman was not the head of the Quaker Church. He was not the CEO. He was not the president. He was just someone who was passionate about what he wanted to do. The net effect was that a few years after John Woolman passed away, the Quaker religion became the first religion in the burgeoning United States to completely denounce and renounce the practice of slavery. No other religion did that at that time. Now, historians look back. His journal is considered one of the great literary works of American society. You can go look it up. It's one of the few publications from that time that is still in publication. When you go back and you look at it as a historian, it's almost impossible to look at that and not ask, how would the world be different today? How would the Civil War have been different? The Civil Rights Movement, the issues we're still dealing with today over the past few years, be different if there had just been 5 or maybe 50 John Woolmans who were giving people different experiences. You'll notice that the Quakers, John Woolman didn't advocate until the policy was made. The Quakers changed their own policy because their culture had been changed and they didn't believe that anymore. Not that the policy isn't important and not that the policy doesn't sometimes change beliefs, it does. Just that the culture was attended to as well. So, with that in mind, what I want to do today is have you open that workbook and say, what are some experiences, what's an experience that I can create that's just one experience? Now, with that in mind, one experience may not change the world. It may, right? Sometimes one experience actually has a huge impact on the hinges of history, are sometimes very small. But even if an experience that I create is not world-changing, at a minimum, it will be a learning experience. My efforts to create a more exceptionally inclusive experience for you, for this group, for this event, for this conversation, for whatever it is, even if it's not successful, will still help me to learn so that the next time I try to make a good, inclusive experience, it'll be better. And that's the learning effect of what we're talking about. So the first step, if you walk through it, the first page or so, it just describes how to do it and some of the underlying principles in case you don't get to come and hear me talk about it, but you just want to share it with somebody and they can read about it for themselves. But then when you get to step 1, it says consider experiences. So the first thing is get out your calendar or a task list and write down every episode that you see that has the potential for inclusion or exceptional inclusion or for exclusion. Don't worry about choosing it. First, just look. And one of the things that we might see just from this portion of the exercise alone is that experiences that on the surface I don't initially see as having to do with exclusion or inclusion, actually there might be a lot more than we realize once we start thinking about it, especially as Cherie was talking about as we move beyond our typical categories. Yes, this should apply to issues of race and gender and so forth, but it can also apply to just relationships or personalities or all kinds of other things as well once we start thinking, what does it mean for me to be inclusive? So please take a moment, get your stuff out, and just generate a handful of things that you might put on that list. If it's helpful, I went through the exercise myself with some of my own. So there's an example of what it looks like when I did it. I made a list and then I ranked it as to potential impact from trying to be exceptionally inclusive. Sorry, was that a question?
Highest rank is the one.
Oh,
with the most-
for me, I put 1 as like the most inclusive and then lower numbers down, but as long as you know what your rank is, you can rank in whatever order you want. All right, once you get like, I don't know, 5, give or take a couple down, then go ahead and try to rank them. Which one do you think would have the best impact? So specifically, if I were to make this exceptionally inclusive, what might have the biggest impact in terms of people's experiences and how that affects their beliefs? Yes. Oh, thank you. So yeah, so in this case, and you can do it whatever order you want, but in this case, for me, I'm going to talk to you about my experience in planning for this training retreat because I felt like that was going to be the highest impact one. Yep. All right, moving ahead here, I'll walk this way around. Once you've done it, so in this case, as I look through, I have an event coming up where I'm going to be training a bunch of administrators at a public school system not here in Louisville. And I felt like that's a high impact one for me. The next question, if you flip to step 2 in the workbook, before we try to create extraordinary inclusion, let's look at what kind of exclusion we might anticipate as we think about this event. So specifically, are there individuals or groups that we think have a reasonable chance of feeling excluded in some way in this activity? How might they be? It might be, what are some of the unique characteristics that might be reasons for feeling excluded? In some cases, these might be the standard ones. It might be race or gender or ability or sexual orientation or some of the normal ones, but it might also be that there's other reasons why people might feel excluded in a situation. It may be that it's the first time they've been invited to this meeting and therefore they're going to be insecure coming to it because they don't know how they fit in, or it could be any number of things. So what are the characteristics that are reasons? What are past experiences? So we talked about anticipated injustice in Cherie's presentation, and how the reason why people anticipate injustice is because they've had bad experiences with it in the past. If that's the case, then they're going to, those are some experiences I should take into account as I think about this. Things that people might say or do. So as I look at the composition of this meeting, or if I look at the interview I'm about to have, or if I look at the other activities I'm a part in, There are some people who just tend to say things that aren't going to, or do things that are going to make people feel excluded. If I know that, can I anticipate it and do something about it in advance so that that's less likely to happen, or I mitigate the effects, or whatever it may be? And then finally, structures that might make people feel excluded in this situation. So the first one that comes to mind is one that Emma and I talked about when we were prepping for this event together. But she talked about the COVID, what's the name of it again, Emma? The medical device that, the pulse oximeter, which basically was developed to help people with diagnosing COVID, but it was tested on people with white skin, and so it gave inaccurate results for people with black skin. Invisible structure until it started seeing the anomalies and the bias in the results, and then we had to do something about that. That's an example of an actual physical structure in the form of a machine, but there's also social structures that might make people feel excluded in this situation. It might be just what college somebody went to and how that affects, even if that college is more likely to affect somebody from a lower, is likely to be one attended by people from a lower socioeconomic status. Do we pay attention to that in terms of thinking about structures that might make people feel excluded? So if you look at this, as I think about my own event that's coming up in a couple of weeks, that I was doing this, some of the groups that matter that are going to be there, now you'll notice, one of the things that's interesting is I put school administrators in this particular district. I think Latinx administrators, there's a subgroup in there that I need to pay particular attention to. Also, in public school systems, it tends to be actually the other way around. It tends to be female dominant rather than male dominant, and some males might feel excluded in that situation. Also, you'll notice this is going to be an event that's about administrators. I put teachers, students, and parents in there because they're not there. And so including people who are not present might also be people who feel excluded. And am I thinking about them and what it means to include them even if they're not going to attend? Characteristics, you'll notice some of the different things I put in there that might lead people, past experiences, so on and so forth. Just getting me thinking about this ahead of time, because if I'm not prepared for these things, then I'm probably not going to be able to mitigate their exclusion. So on step 2, take a moment and try to walk through that and see what you can anticipate in your own event. All right, the next step after anticipating exclusion is to generate inclusion. And to do this, we need to think about it in a couple of ways. One is in the previous page, the previous step, we identified a number of things that could be obstacles to inclusion, or basically things that might create exclusion. As a result, take the ones that you think are most likely to happen. Maybe if they're all likely to happen, it's a long list or whatever it may be. But what are they and how am I going to overcome them? Can I anticipate going and talking to this person who always says rude things, and I know you don't, but, and working with her ahead of time to make sure that she doesn't? Can I anticipate what structures are in place and how I'm going to address those before the experience starts in some way? Whatever it is, what are my ideas for overcoming it? And then, just because I overcome exclusion doesn't mean that I've created an inclusive event. I have to go on the other side and make sure that we're actually thinking ahead and really saying, what can we do to make you feel special, like you belong, like you're a part of what we're doing, that we want you here and you are valued because you are a part of what we are doing? What makes it exceptional? To help with that, you'll notice there's a lot of starter ideas. This is a 2-page step because it has lots of starter ideas to help with that process of ways that you can address the past or deal with implicit or explicit bias, ideas for altering or adapting structures, ideas for just making it exceptional. Some of them are going to apply to your situation, some of them aren't. They're just starter ideas to help get going on this. But the idea is if we can move beyond eliminating exclusion and even move beyond just, hey, let's be inclusive, but do it exceptionally, then we're more likely to change people's beliefs so that this becomes a part of what we do, whether or not I'm the CEO or the president or the provost or whatever it may be. So, in terms of my own experience that I was planning, I focused on not being consulted and not being present as 2 critical things that I needed to address. That means I should coach the central administration on listening to people and asking them to speak first. I should assign people to speak for those who are not present. And I can design the event so it begins with the celebration activity of the things that make people's unique contributions important in this situation. I can ask people for stories, and when they share them, I can not just say, good story, but actually pull things out of your story and tell you why they're a contribution and why I care about them. And those might help me to create this as an exceptionally inclusive event. So take a moment, look at your own, and see what ideas you can generate. All right, now before we go on to the final step in this process, let me just open this up for a minute. Did any of you have any interesting insights you'd be willing to share from our brief attempt to walk through this process? What insights occurred to you? What questions occurred to you? What learnings happened just from trying to walk through this process and make myself think in this way?
I think it was interesting how you were pretty strategic in thinking of who wasn't in the space too. So kind of listing out who exactly any decisions that are made that's going to impact that group, but also listing out those two how that representation is going to end up making them feel inclusive although they're not in the room.
Thank you. For anyone who didn't hear, she said she really appreciated the strategicness, if that's a word, of thinking about the people who aren't there. And this is something that, in some level is a great idea for management in general, to think about who's not present. A lot of times, especially if you are in a relatively high position in an organization, maybe leave, really simple, but one thing is leave 5 minutes at the end of the meeting to ask who needs to know about this and what message are we going to give to them and who's going to get it out to them. That does a lot to make people feel included. So thank you. Other observations? Yeah,
It's more like a question.
please.
So we have a strategic plan for a solution to something that hasn't been working well. But at what point do we say, this is just not a good idea, let's leave it behind and work on something else?
Are you saying in general strategic plan or this plan in particular?
This plan in particular, so let's say we have initiative and we keep trying working on it. At what point we say, you know what, this is just not a good idea, let's work on something else?
That's a great question, and I don't think the answer is going to be the same for every situation. And so as a result, I think one thing that's helpful, one thing I was going to do, and we won't because we don't have as much time, but after we had finished trying to fill this out, I was going to have you all get in pairs and ask each other for feedback. And I think that as you go through this feedback, if you say, hey, here's what I'd like to do, here's what I'm going to try, get some feedback, make it better, go out and do it, and see what works. And then, like Bridget talked about in her presentation, you'll notice the front side was, this is what we intend to do. The back side is, this is what actually happened. By comparing that, we learn from it, and we say, that's a good point at which we say, should we try this again? Should we not try it again? Do some of these, for example, the starter ideas, we tried this starter idea in this situation and it did not work. Does that mean that that doesn't work on our organization and we should never do it again? Or does that mean we just shouldn't do it in this event or this kind of event? But I highly recommend what Bridget started us with in terms of these after-action reviews, because every one of these is a learning opportunity. And the effort to learn from it means that the next time I attempt this, it's going to get better and we're going to learn from it. In fact, jumping ahead a little bit, if you look at the last page, second to last page or last page? Second to last page except for the end notes, you'll notice it has additional resources. And then the one that's depicted there is a smartphone application. So at the Center for Positive Leadership, we've developed a smartphone application called the Leadership Amplifier. And what it is it's a more elaborate version of what we're doing here today. It allows us to look at multiple virtues, but it allows us to create communities or learning teams of people who try things out together, put their ideas in, give each other feedback, report on how it went well, so that not only can I learn from giving myself getting feedback from the event, I can also learn from my learning team who gives me feedback and ideas on how to do it better. So if you're interested on practicing together in a team, then the app is a good way to take this idea and blow it out to a larger scale for thinking about it more. So I don't know if there is one principle for assessing it, but I do think that it absolutely should be part of a learning process. In a lot of ways, I think about it like entrepreneurship. When it used to be people would just develop a product, put it out on the market, and it succeeded or failed. Now the wisdom among entrepreneurs is to create a minimally viable product. What's the smallest, least expensive thing that we can do to just get it out there and see how the market responds, and then fix it, and then try again, and fix it, and try it again. Same principle here is our market is the world, and our product is inclusivity, and we're going to try a little experiment and learn from it and try again until we get better and better at it over time. So, great question. Thank you. The last step, watching my time here, is to take what you put in the first 3 steps and now make an actual plan. What does this look like in our experience as we put it together? And so I just encourage you, for the sake of time, I'm not going to do it here, but to encourage you to actually walk that through and say, what's my plan in this situation? The other things that I want to mention really quickly before we finish, jumping all the way ahead here, is that these tools that we offer are just the beginning. So in addition to this tool, this workbook is a way to begin learning it. I mentioned the Leadership Amplifier. Another initiative in the Center for Positive Leadership is we're creating what we're calling teams of local world changers. And these teams are larger products where we're looking for sponsors who support teams as they go through and take on projects, and we help develop them in leadership, in positive leadership so that they can magnify and enhance their impact in whatever project. Some will take on projects within an organization, like reducing burnout in the organization where I work. Others will take on community ones. So we've been engaging people in discussions about violence and how do we address violence in the community and what would a project look like for them and how would we sponsor a local World Changer team on managing that. And so it may be that there are issues around inclusivity and justice that we can create teams for. There are other tools for leading with other virtues. We've freed our website, but all of these tools and all these things give us opportunities to expand, enhance, deepen, and grow our impact in what we do. And we encourage you to look on them, especially when our website is done. And then also, in conclusion, if this was a useful and helpful event for people today and learning, we are continuing to develop and provide these events. And so I encourage you to look at the QR code and see what you can pull off there. But we have, for example, Manuela Lara is a woman from Colombia. She's an artist who has gone out and find indigenous women who are changing their communities by helping educate the children or cleaning the water for this village or whatever it is. And she depicts them in art and puts it into the the World Wide Web, so that people can see what they're doing and their work can't be squashed because now they're getting larger support from broader people. And she's going to come and talk to us about what she does. Our next tool showcase, like today, we're going to, as I mentioned earlier, is going to address burnout. And so Brad Shuck is going to help us see how to address burnout by leading with compassion. And Melissa Brock is going to talk to us about addressing burnout by leading with curiosity. Daniel Montgomery is going to talk to us about addressing burnout by leading with playfulness. And Patty Whiter is going to help us learn how to address burnout by leading with humility. And so we'll have a similar event to the one that we have today to address the issue of burnout as we move forward. So we hope that this has been helpful for everyone today, and we'll hope that you'll continue to join us, whether it's in using our tools, coming to our events, or otherwise engaging with us in the various things that we do. Thank you for your time today.